All right, welcome. Today we're kicking off a two-part technical tour of the outer ear, starting with the intricate architecture of the pinna, and then later we'll get into the mechanics of the external canal.
So in this first segment, Part 3A, we're really going to be focusing on the pinna's architecture. Think of it like mapping a landscape. We'll look at its surface, the framework underneath, and most importantly, why it's so clinically relevant for diagnosis and surgery.
So you might be looking at your ear and thinking, it's just a flap of cartilage, right? Well, it's so much more. Let's dig into why this structure is far more than just a funnel for sound. Once you know what you're looking at, it becomes this detailed diagnostic and surgical map.
Here's the plan. We'll start with a quick overview, then we'll take a guided tour of all its nooks and crannies. After that, we'll look at the cartilage and skin framework, trace its blood supply, which is super important, and then we'll wrap it all up by connecting this anatomy to a really classic clinical problem.
Okay, let's get right into it. The first thing you've got to appreciate is that the pinna isn't just a static object, it's a rich clinical landscape. I mean, every single curve and depression can tell a story, giving you clues about everything from congenital conditions to even systemic diseases.
All right, now let's get systematic. We're going to take a tour of the pinna's topography. We'll start right at the outer edge and work our way in, naming each part and, crucially, talking about why it matters clinically.
Okay, first up is the helix. That's the main carved rim on the outside of your ear. Now, because this part gets a ton of sun exposure, it's a super common spot for sun-related skin cancers. It's also a classic location for something called tophi, these chalky little deposits that are a telltale sign of gout. And you know what's really cool about the helix is this common little variation. If you feel along the top edge of your ear, you might find a small bump. That's called Darwin's tubercle. It's completely harmless, but it's a fascinating direct link to our primate ancestry, a remnant of when our ancestors had pointed ears.
Moving inward from the helix, you'll find the antihelix. See that Y-shaped ridge? That's it. This feature is what really gives the ear its primary shape. And here's the clinical tie-in. If this fold is underdeveloped or just flat, the ear tends to stick out. This is the cause of prominent ears, and the whole point of an otoplasty, or corrective surgery, is to create or enhance this very fold.
Now we get to the concha. This is the big, bowl-shaped area right in the middle that leads into the ear canal. Its main job acoustically is to funnel sound waves in, but from a surgical standpoint, the cartilage here is like gold. It's often harvested for reconstructive surgery, especially for things like rhinoplasty, because it has the perfect shape and strength.
And right at the entrance to the ear canal, you have this little flap of cartilage called the tragus. This little guy is a super important diagnostic landmark. Here's why. If someone has an outer ear infection, swimmer's ear, just pushing on the tragus will be really painful. That's called a positive tragal sign, and it's a classic way to tell if the problem is in the outer ear canal and not the middle ear. Okay, so we've mapped the surface, but to really get a handle on the pinna, we need to look deeper, right? Let's talk about the foundation. The cartilage and the skin that covers it. This is really critical. The entire incredibly complex shape of the pinna, all those ridges and valleys we just talked about, is sculpted from one single continuous piece of cartilage. It's not a bunch of parts stuck together. And that fact has huge implications for surgeons.
Now, there is one little break in that continuous plate of cartilage. It's a notch called the incisura terminalis. And this little notch is a massive surgical landmark. It's basically the dividing line between the pinna's cartilage and the ear canal's cartilage, and it's the exact spot where surgeons make an endoaural incision to get into the canal.
Okay, this is a fantastic illustration of a really important difference. The skin on the front of your ear is super thin and basically shrink-wrapped to the cartilage underneath. There's no fat there, but the skin on the back, it's thicker and much looser. This totally changes things. Swelling on the front is incredibly painful because the fluid has nowhere to go. But that loose skin on the back is perfect for surgeons to create flaps. All right, now we get to what is arguably the most important layer here, the perichondrium. It's this thin layer of tissue that covers the cartilage. Why is it so important? Because the cartilage itself has 0 blood vessels. None. It gets its entire blood supply, all of its oxygen, all of its nutrients, from this thin sheath. If you remember one thing, remember that. So, if the perichondrium is the lifeline, what feeds the perichondrium? Let's trace the arteries that keep the whole pinna alive and well. Well, the good news is the pinna has a fantastic blood supply. It's robust and it's redundant, meaning it has backups. It's fed by two main branches from the external carotid artery. You've got the posterior auricular artery, which is the main player. It supplies the back and even sends branches through to the front. And then it's backed up by the superficial temporal artery, which takes care of the front. This dual supply is exactly why the ear is so tough and can survive some pretty nasty injuries without dying off.
Okay, time to connect the dots. Let's use all the anatomy we've just learned to understand a very classic injury you see in contact sports like wrestling or rugby, the cauliflower ear.
So how does a hit to the ear lead to this deformity? Well, the explanation perfectly ties together everything we've talked about, that tightly adherent skin on the front, the vital importance of the perichondrium, and the fact that the cartilage itself has no blood supply.
It's really a domino effect. First, you get a shearing trauma, a blow that slides across the ear. This rips the perichondrium right off the cartilage. Next, blood starts to pool in that new space, creating what's called a subperichondrial hematoma. Now here's the killer step. That pool of blood physically lifts the perichondrium away, completely cutting off the cartilage's blood supply. The cartilage, now starving, starts to die and fold in on itself. Finally, that blood clot turns into fibrous scar tissue, and that's what creates the permanent lumpy deformity.
And that brings us to our clinical pearl for today. Please like and subscribe for more custom medical videos made just for you.
Okay, so we're all done with the pinna. We've mapped the entrance to the ear, so let's move on to the next segment.
Now that we've mapped the entrance, what about the tunnel itself? How does the ear canal actually keep itself clean? In our next explainer, Part 3b, we're going to dive into the external auditory canal and explore its absolutely remarkable mechanism of epithelial migration. You won't want to miss it.
All right, so let's continue our tour of the outer ear and dive right into Part 3b, the external canal, and its truly amazing self-cleaning mechanics. So, now that we've covered the pinna, we're moving just a little bit deeper into the external auditory canal itself. Now, you might just think of it as a simple tube, right? But it is so much more than that. We're talking about a self-cleaning, protective marvel of biological engineering. The real question is, how on earth does it work? Well, one of the first clues to its clever design is its actual shape. It's not straight at all. It has this protective S shape. And you know, that curve isn't random. It's a built-in safety feature. It's designed to keep the eardrum from being in a direct line of sight, protecting it from, well, anything trying to get in. And if you've ever had your ears checked, this is exactly why the doctor has to pull your ear up and back. They're literally straightening out that S curve just so they can get a clear view of the eardrum. Okay, so the canal isn't just one uniform structure either. It's actually split into two very distinct zones, and each one has a totally different role to play. This is a classic case of structure-defining function. If you look at the outer third, it's made of flexible cartilage. The skin here is pretty thick, about 1.5 millimeters, and it's loaded with glands and hair follicles. You can think of this as the factory section. But then you get to the inner two-thirds, and it's a completely different story. It's rigid bone, and the skin covering it is incredibly thin. We're talking just 0.2 millimeters. And notice what's missing? No glands, no hair. This is the delicate delivery section that leads right up to the eardrum. Now, right at the junction where these two zones meet, there's a really important landmark, the isthmus. This is the narrowest point of the entire canal. It's basically a natural bottleneck. And it's no surprise then that this is the exact spot where earwax and other debris tend to get stuck, causing blockages. And that little fact actually brings us to a quick clinical pearl. You know, if you're finding this kind of detailed breakdown useful and you want to see more, definitely hit that like button and subscribe. We make these custom medical videos just for you. Okay, with that said, let's move on. All right, let's talk about something we all know about but maybe don't really understand, cerumen. Yeah, we all call it earwax, but a much better way to think of it is as the canal's very own protective shield. Seriously, this stuff is not just some gross waste product. It's a brilliant, multi-purpose defense system. For one, it's sticky, so traps all sorts of things like dust, debris, even the occasional unlucky insect that wanders in. But it's also antimicrobial and antifungal. It's water repellent, and it lubricates that super delicate skin inside the canal. It's an absolute biological wonder. So what's its secret weapon? How does it fight off microbes? Well, it all comes down to its pH. Cerumen is actually acidic, with a pH of around 6.0. This creates something called an acid mantle, a chemical barrier that is just plain hostile to most bacteria and fungi. This is your body's #1 chemical defense against common infections like swimmer's ear.
But honestly, the coolest part of the ear canal, for me anyway, has to be its unbelievable self-cleaning mechanism. It's called epithelial migration. And it's basically this process where your skin cells are constantly on the move, marching from the eardrum outward, like a tiny biological conveyor belt, carrying all the old wax and debris with them.
So let's follow this conveyor belt in action. It all starts right at the center of the eardrum, at the umbo, where new skin cells are born. From there, they start migrating outward, radially, across the entire surface of the eardrum. Then, they make the turn into the canal and just keep on marching along the walls, pushing everything, old wax, trapped debris, out of the ear. It's incredible. And get this, the speed of this thing is about 1 millimeter per day. Now, to give you some perspective, that's almost exactly the same rate that your fingernails grow. So think about that. Your ear canal isn't just a passive tube, it is constantly and actively cleaning itself out day in and day out. And this whole amazing self-cleaning system is precisely why putting cotton swabs in your ear is such a terrible idea. You're not cleaning anything. All you're doing is taking all that gunk and pushing it past the isthmus, that narrow point, into the bony part of the canal where it doesn't belong. You're basically jamming up the whole conveyor belt system. And what's worse, you're risking a serious injury to that paper-thin skin. So, as you can see, the ear canal is not a passive tube at all. It's a dynamic, active, self-maintaining organ. Which kind of leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? If something that looks this simple has such a complex, active system going on inside, what other supposedly simple parts of our body are we totally overlooking?